Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Matt Erpelding, and I'm the Vice President of Government and Community Relations for the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. And today we have a conversation between a state senator and a representative who are retiring from the body to really kind of explore the idea behind the state legislature and its functions. We'll cover everything from the power balance to some of the basics behind how the legislature is made up and how the committees actually work. But before we get there, I just want to thank a couple of groups. The first is the Boise Young Professionals are the folks who really came up with this idea. And the idea is to try to engage young people, teach them about the government, and encourage them to possibly get out and vote. So today, we're very excited to be partnered with the Boise Young Professionals. We also have a media partner for this event, and that media partner is the Idaho Statesman. They see true value in civic engagement, and we are excited to have them as partners. And today's event is sponsored by Micron and AT&T. Both are longstanding partners of the Boise Chamber of Commerce. And as you all know, the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce is Idaho's only 5-star accredited member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And we're very proud of that. And to that end, we try to design and present high-quality educational programming. Today's sponsor, AT&T, has a very brief message for us before we get started with our conversation.
As business moves forward, we're all changing the way things get done. Like how we redefine collaboration, how we come up with new ways to serve our customers and deliver our products.
This one is cheddar. It's delicious.
Oh, you look so healthy.
But no matter how things change, one thing never will. You can rely on the people and the network of AT&T to help keep your business connected.
And now I'm joined by Idaho Statesman's Scott McIntosh. And today, Scott, you and I are going to be moderating this conversation. But before we bring in our guests, let's just do a little bit of nuts and bolts about the legislature. The legislature is made up of 35 districts. And those 30, maybe you can talk a little bit about how those 35 districts come to be.
Yeah, so we've got 35 districts. They're divided equally by voter. And they're divided up every 10 years based on the census. So as most people know, this year a census is going on, and next year we will be redistricting those districts. So you might remember in 2010 we did this and changed a lot of districts. That's going to be happening again next year. And interestingly, there is a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year asking voters to amend the Constitution to fix the number of legislative districts at 35. So the Constitution says you can have anywhere from 30 to 35 districts. And this constitutional amendment that people will be voting on in November sets that number at 35 districts. And that's going to be interesting how that plays out, because as we grow population-wise, we're going to see districts with higher numbers of voters, and particularly in rural parts of the state, you're going to have larger geographic districts because you're talking about 53,000 voters in a district. Well, to get those numbers out in rural parts of Idaho, you're going to have these massive multi-county districts, which we already do have. But this will, setting it at 35 will keep that trend going.
And to your point, the legislature every 10 years picks those districts. And because it's based on population, we anticipate the amount of people that each representative represents going up by about between 10 and 13,000 starting next year. And so as those urban districts become more condensed and more compact, you'll see districts in urban areas increase and those geographic rural districts exploding in terms of size. And we've already got a couple really big ones. In addition to that, when Idaho became a state, it became a state during the progressive Teddy Roosevelt movement. And at the time, they really didn't like politicians to hold a seat for very long. So Idaho is one of a few states that the senators and the state representatives serve the same district and serve the same term. So every 2 years, no matter which way you slice it, everyone is up for election. That's always been a sticking point for me, because I always thought that if you let the senators have a little bit longer term, it would kind of smooth out some of the populism that is kind of a piece of our politics here in Idaho.
Right. Every 2 years, you get this session that is cut short and tends to have these kind of populist, like you said, populist legislation every time that there's an election. So that's kind of what we had this session.
And so without further ado, because I know you're not here to listen to Scott or myself, I'd like to first introduce Senator Cherie Buckner-Webb, who I had the pleasure of serving with for 6-7 years, and actually worked for her when I was a staffer. But Senator Cherie Buckner-Webb is the Assistant Minority Leader and was elected to the House of Representatives in 2010, and she moved to the Idaho Senate in 2012, where she was reelected in 14, 16, and 18. She served on the Transportation, Education, and State Affairs Standing Committees, and she also served on the Capital Services Committee, the Public Defense Reform, Legislative Council, Idaho Council on Indian Affairs, Foster Care, Interim Committee, Housing and Finance Association, and Justice Reinvestment Committees. She actually is an accomplished gospel, jazz, and blues vocalist. She's recorded with jazz greats like Gene Harris, released a solo CD by his grace, and received the Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts from the Idaho Commission of the Arts. Her community leadership is evidenced by her numerous awards, including the Idaho Business Review's Icon Award, Women of the Year in 2019, and a host of other awards for her leadership. Senator Cherie Buckner-Webb, we are so glad to have you. And before we get going, we need to introduce one more, and that is our good friend, Representative Robert Anderst.
Yeah, Representative Robert Anderst is a fifth-generation Idahoan from Pocatello. He was elected to the Idaho House of Representatives in 2012 as part of the largest class of new legislators in Idaho history. He subsequently won re-election from 2014 to 2018. During his tenure, he served on the Revenue and Taxation Committee for all 8 years and has served on Energy, Environment, and Technology, Commerce and Human Resources, and the Business Committee. He is finishing his career as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, a position he has held for 4 years. He is involved with the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Organization and has served on the Permanent Building Fund Advisory Council since 2016. He is currently Vice President of National Accounts at Title I Corporation and has been in the real estate industry for 25 years, most of which was in leadership roles in the title escrow sector. He has also worked as a commercial real estate broker and developer. He received his associate's degree in business marketing and management from Idaho State University, and he has been on the board of the Nampa Boys and Girls Club for nearly 20 years. He has 2 children, both educated in Idaho's public schools, and he loves riding his Harley through our state. Welcome.
We're excited to have the 4 of us together for this conversation. But before we start talking about the state legislature and its infrastructure, just a really quick check-in, and we'll start with you, Representative Anderst. How are you handling this, I don't know, life-changing upside-down world pandemic?
Well, first of all, thanks, Matt and Scott, for having us and putting this together. So title and escrow has changed completely. The days when you sat down in a closing room for an hour across from an escrow closer with four other people in the closing room is not how we're doing business right now. I've actually been doing closings in a parking lot at our Eagle office since March. So it's changed everything. Having said that, this is the best market that we've ever had, combined with the purchase and sale market as well as refinances. From a volume standpoint and appreciation, this market we've never seen anything like it.
Now, Senator Buckner-Webb.
Hi there. I'm so glad to be with you. And I'm really glad to hear what Anderst is telling me, Representative Anderst, because we have a few rentals and it's been just really a rosy time for us, particularly because I have a consultancy when I'm outside the legislature and would have been traveling. I had, I think, 35 days on my schedule and all of them were collapsed. They were 2 and 3 days things. So thank God for the real estate market right now that things are going very well. So we're doing things a little differently. I'm home a lot.
And it's great to see you, Senator.
You too.
Scott?
Yeah, it's rough. I miss my coworkers. All the reporters and editors from the Statesman were all working from home, and I just miss being in an office with a bunch of other journalists and jawboning about journalism and the news. So I hope we get to a day where we're back in the office all together, because I sure do miss it.
One of the things I just want to add is how invaluable this kind of a format is for us, because what would we be doing if we didn't have this opportunity to get together like this and continue our business as we need to? So that's huge.
And to your point, one of the crazy things about how technology has helped us through this is it has helped with at least a feeling of a lack of isolation. Just being able to see you after not seeing you for 8 months at all is a big deal. And I know, Scott, you're going to ask the first question to both these folks, so take it away.
All right. Well, so our first question, just want to have you give us a little bit of background about the job. What does a state legislator do? How long are the terms? What's the pay? Is it part-time, full-time? Give us a little background on what the job is like. And we'll start with you, Senator Buckner-Webb.
Well, I remember when I first was getting ready to run, I was thinking, this is a full-time job. What can I do? And everybody says, oh, no, it's just 3 months of the year. And I want to tell you that's what's on the books, but that's not what it takes, because I think that every day of your life that you're in the legislature, if you're committed to your job, you're going to have some opportunity to demonstrate that you're representing the people. So it is, by definition, a part-time job. It is very definitely part-time pay. But if you're committed, it's a full-time job.
Representative Anderst?
Yeah, definitely something that goes well beyond the 3 months that we're in the legislative session. And that's honestly part of the reason why I've decided to step back is obviously I'm not at a point in my career where I'm retiring, and you get to the point where so much builds on your plate from a legislative standpoint that all the other things, your normal business, the things that you need to do on a day-to-day basis start to fall behind, and so you get to a point where you've got to kind of pick, and that's why I had to step back. But it's definitely a huge time commitment. At the same time, it's very rewarding. You get a very broad group of topics to deal with. You meet great people, and from a day-to-day standpoint, there's things there that they'll take away and use the rest of my life for sure.
And to add to that, I think a lot of people don't realize that the legislature is considered a citizens legislature, and that is basically a hodgepodge of people from different backgrounds coming into the body to pass legislation during the winter. But for the most part, every legislator makes between $16,000 and $20,000. And I give you that range only because if you're in leadership, you get a little bit extra stipend. But for the most part, legislators are making about $18,000 a year plus healthcare to be in the body. And so it is, to Senator Buckner-Webb's point, it is on the books that it's part-time, but that's not representative of the effort and the amount of time that people put into it. Senator Buckner-Webb, like I said, the legislature only runs from January to March, but once the session ends, we have a lot of work to do, particularly from a constituent services perspective. And I know when I was in office, you were the person that everyone in our district called. And so I knew how much you were doing in terms of constituent services. So could you just talk a little bit about some of the things you did from a constituent services perspective?
Well, I would say that part of the reason I got a lot of those calls, there are not many Black folks in Idaho, and they say, oh, that's the Black legislator, so they can find, you can be in the grocery store, you can be the dry cleaners. So I was going to say, that's her, let's stop and talk to her. But I would say that in service to the people that we are representing, I think that everybody in that legislature works very, very diligently. Besides researching legislation that might come up in the following year, or seeing what other states are doing, looking at what's been done in the past that needs to be revisited. I mean, when you're walking, talking, having dinner, something will come up from people in your district, and there's an opportunity to make a difference. And I think that everybody that chooses to run for office and to serve their legislators have to understand that their primary responsibility in a lot of ways, and it's hard to segment your family and all that, and you join as a family when you join the legislature, is creating and debating and voting on things, even in other institutions that we're part of. As part of the legislature, we may go to a national or convention for education. I did that many times. We're trying to solidify things that we can do collectively and individually. So we have a lot of opportunity, things like healthcare and commerce and infrastructure and transportation. We've got to get ourselves at least familiar with some of the things that we may need to deal with when we get back in the full-time legislature. That's a short period of that's a small window, 3 months. So you have to get yourself ready in preparation for doing the work.
And the other thing I appreciated about you as a follow-up question is, and I didn't read this in your bio, but you have a master's in social work from Northwest Nazarene, and you often worked with individual families and constituents to help them navigate through health and welfare or through some of the other major bureaucracies. So can you just talk a little bit about how you did that?
Well, you know, one of the things that's really kind of a double-edged sword. Being a legislator, I am a legislator and I am an MSW. So sometimes access to people was maybe easier for me by that Senate thing, and sometimes it was the MSW. And let me tell you, I'll use either one I can to be of service to people that I come in contact with. And so it was really easy to explain that I am both. I never leave one or the other behind. So that means I have to behave more often because of the legislative piece, but also that I have the resources from people in the community, from agencies, from people from the prison system to the juvenile justice system to education, where welfare and not, I don't mean welfare like you're on the dole, but the welfare of citizens comes to need some help from time to time. So that was a wonderful opportunity. And I will say that during the time that I was in the legislature, the National Association of Social Workers began to see opportunities for their students that they hadn't seen before. So I actually had the opportunity to be the one that moderated the students' time in the legislature. Even on the Republican side, we had to have some agreements that we wouldn't be talking about legislation, but I could proctor them being in the legislature. There's an invaluable need for social workers, and we can use them in the legislature.
And Representative Anderst, kind of a similar question regarding constituent services over your 8 years in the legislature. How did you decide what to work on and what not to work on during your time?
Great question. It is difficult because, like you said, there isn't. We don't have the resources to respond to everything. So first and foremost, you have to prioritize. Obviously, you focus on questions or concerns that are coming from your district. Once you kind of, and we get a lot of constituent contact. Of course, everybody that lives in the state of Idaho in one form or fashion is a constituent, but you have to focus on your district. And then once you've gotten to that point, you also kind of look at the requests. You look at, is it something that I can actually help with? I always tried to contact them back, whether by email or I actually was more likely to pick up the phone and give somebody a call than an email. It just seemed like it saved time and was more effective. But yeah, you just have to kind of sift through all of the questions that come through. And to be totally honest with you, in the 8 years, I would get, maybe 15 or 20 like legitimate constituent questions or things that they needed help with a month. And so it was pretty manageable from that perspective. I think there's probably a lot of people out there that don't understand how accessible most of the individual legislators are. And so usually when they send an email if they send an email, and they get a phone call back, it surprises them. I think most people expect not to hear back, but back to Matt's original point, we're a citizen legislature. The individual legislators that make up the body are just regular citizens, just like everybody else. And so when whatever questions they have are important for us to kind of work through, and if we can help them out, point them in the right direction, get somebody's attention. There's a lot of things that you can do that don't take a lot of time, but can be pretty impactful for those people that are looking for help.
If I may add one thing that we have to do when we're out of session, as you spoke to, we are in for 2-year terms. So a lot of our time outside the session is making contact, particularly with people in our district, and letting them know what we've been doing, what we're going to do, so that we can, continuity in those offices is really important for a period of time so you can get things done. So that running for office isn't some rah-rah, fun thing all the time. It's serious business, and it takes quite a bit of time, especially in those areas that are really spread out.
And to your point, the continuity piece is something that I didn't understand when I got into the body. And Representative Anderst and I were elected the same year, and it felt like it took us 3 or 4 years to even figure out where the processes went. And so when I came into the legislature, I was a huge supporter of term limits. And then I realized, the legislature has a basic turnover rate. The average legislator lasts about 8 years, and its turnover rate is about 1/3 every 2 years. But that institutional knowledge is really critical. And so you have those folks, as you get more experience in institutional knowledge, it's really important. So it shifted my view as I learned that. Senator Buckner-Webb, I've got a.
I think Senator Representative Anderst was just about to speak. Sorry.
Oh,
no, go ahead, Matt. That's okay. We'll keep you on time.
Give it to me. We got plenty of time.
Oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I do want to just ask you, Representative Anderst and Senator Buckner-Webb, is from when we did last week with Congressman LaRocco in Labrador, they indicated they have 15 staff in the state of Idaho, and they have 15 staff in DC. Talk a little bit about the staffing situation for the Idaho Senate and House.
Well, the House is pretty easy. There really isn't any. As a committee chairman, you do have we do have some support there. The leadership has some support, but the majority and the minority share, I think it's two liaisons that can help with putting mail out and things like that. But there really isn't any. So the constituent work that individual legislators do, they do on their own. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Our districts are, an average legislative district is 43,000 people. And like I said, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the amount of requests that we had. And so by me actually handling it, I think it made for a better legislator, as opposed to just having people that took care of that stuff for you. And it definitely helped me navigate and find ways to help others navigate agencies and things like that. So double-edged sword.
Yep. Senator Buckner-Webb, how was it?
I have to give Mr. Erpelding big credit, because we really had a great transition after he came to office in the House, because we had almost nobody taking care of anybody. But we made a purposeful decision as Democrats to bring along Democrats for the future. And so we found ways to raise money through our own campaigns to support having folks working for us or with us. And it's been a great opportunity for those students to learn more. Most of them were students, about what government's like, about what the opportunity is for them in the future, about determining what they'd like to do or how they can best impact and serve their state. So it's been a real boon for us. We just kicked butt, and I have to give him, I shouldn't say butt on this thing. We kicked it, and I have to give Erpelding credit.
Yeah, Matt, hey, Matt, I should mention too, we do have a pretty thorough intern program, and most I shouldn't say most, but a lot of legislators do bring interns in that can help out. And to Senator Webb's point, it's a great learning experience for them. It's a great resource for individual legislators and for people coming in future sessions. If you're paying attention to this, it's well worth the time to try and find somebody that can be helpful.
And on the other side, incredibly, when we talk about we're looking for, the turnover can be difficult. Well, we sure get another view of the world. We bring these young kids in here working. They're going, "What are you doing? That? What's that? Why? Ugh, that stuff's so passé." And particularly when we're talking about technology, there's all kinds of unbelievable benefits that we've received from having those students and young adults on our staff.
And to that point, on whether you're Republican or Democrat, it is, in my experience, it was essentially mandatory that I found an intern to help me get through the process. And that piece was really key. So those people that are watching and want to get involved, there you go. This one's for both of you because we have standing committees that meet every year and are consistent across the board. And we have interim committees, and those interim committees are variable. Take a second. I'll start with you, Representative Anderst. Take a second to talk about the committees you were on, and if you could, since you're our House representative, talk about the makeup of the House committees and kind of how that whole thing works.
Sure. So when you talk about the standing committees, they break down into two different kinds. You've got your privileged committees and non-privileged. And the only thing that distinguishes between the two is the privileged committees typically meet on a daily basis during the session, and they continue to have introduction of bill permission throughout the legislative session. So for instance, revenue and tax, health and welfare, education, state affairs, those are all privileged committees. Ways and Means is a privileged committee as well. Your non-privileged committees would be like business, commerce, energy, environment, technology, and those committees typically meet every other day, either odd or even. And when you go into the legislative body, typically you will be assigned, in most cases, 3 committees. So you'll have a privileged committee, a morning committee is what they're called, and then 2 afternoon committees to serve on. As you can imagine, the topics that each of those committees take up are geared towards that specific committee. So Rev and Tax clearly deals with tax policy, education, health and welfare, and so on. When it comes to the interim committees, there's no consistency there. Those are established on each legislative session basis. So some years you may have no interim committees, and some years you may have a whole bunch of them. And then there's also working groups that are non-formal, but are still put together. And some examples, so over the years I sat on, we did an interim committee on urban renewal districts. We've done a couple of them on property taxes. There's no shortage of them, and you can always find them on the legislative website to find out which interim committees are in place. And then as far as committees that meet in the off session but are standing, you also have things like the Permanent Building Fund Advisory Council and Legislative Services, or not Legislative Council. There's some of these standing committees that meet year round that some legislators participate in. I think that's a pretty good summary of it. But if you have anything specific else you want to add to it.
Well, Senator Buckner-Webb, the Senate's a little different, 35 people instead of 70 people, but and you were on a host of different committees, many of which created lasting change over time, particularly in criminal justice reform. So maybe you can speak a little bit to the interim committee from your experience.
I think it's an amazing process because so many of these things, you can't get anything done in 3 months and these could go on forever and ever. But the depth and intensity of the interim committees allows us to make some, I think, substantive changes. And we also have the opportunity to use the JLOC, what am I trying to call that? Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. to help us do some more in-depth work, and we can come and meet for a lot of different reasons. Child Protection Legislative Oversight Committee was a big deal. Criminal Justice Oversight. The other one was about foster care. We made quantum leaps. It was really interesting when we first gathered to talk about foster care. Many people thought that guardian ad litems were paid to help these children transition. It is a volunteer position, and they kept wondering why we didn't have enough people. Well, first of all, we didn't have enough structure. We didn't have enough oversight. And these people were doing it out of the kindness and goodness of their heart. And the kindness and goodness of my heart may be different than Matt's or somebody else's. And so we needed structure. So these committees are invaluable. We've had some real quantum leaps. And the prison system, we still have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. They're way over, too many people there, too much recidivism. We've got lots of work to do. So these committees help us make really forward steps. It seems like it's taken a long time, but we're making steps forward by use of these committees.
There's a question. Did you have something to add there? No. There's a question here that is essentially who establishes the interim committees. Do one of you want to take that real quick?
Gosh, I'm not even sure. It comes usually out of the midst of a standing committee, and then some issue comes up. Go ahead, anybody.
So on the House side, typically the Speaker will do a concurrent resolution that establishes it for a period of time. If there's an appropriation that needs to go with it, then that has to go through the Appropriations Committee. But typically leadership puts those together, and they define. And
they have to sanction them. Yes.
Yeah, there's also the Leg Council. So you could have a concurrent resolution that passes the House and the Senate. So in theory, the committee is available, but Leg Council could decide not to fund it, and it would essentially make it so it didn't have any meetings. So you have a system in place, but it's largely driven, to your point, it's largely driven by leadership and often precipitated by current events. So the urban renewal example is a good one, or the property tax interim committee that's currently meeting, which may be a working group. An interim committee is established by a concurrent resolution that either starts in the Senate or the House. A working committee is literally established by majority leadership that is collaborated between the Senate and the House.
The thing I really do like about the interim committee process, especially the bicameral one, is that if you do get a product that comes out, it is so much easier to get that product passed if you've got consensus. And I know a lot of these issues are so technical and so difficult that, to Senator Buckner-Webb's point, it takes a long time to really drill down something you can't do in a legislative session to come up with a good product. And so I do think that they're invaluable in that sense. I do think sometimes they can drag on and become unproductive, and sometimes we need them just to have them. But when they do work out, they can come up with good product.
Often these committees have to reach out to other committees that are not part of our body, and partner with them and see what's going to happen, particularly with some of the prison system, some of those kinds of things, some of the foster care thing. We have to get with other systems and then try to bring them into our periphery, and then we have to find a way to work together to make it come to fruition.
Just wanted to shift gears a little bit. This is a question for both of you. What is something that people are always surprised to find out that is something that a state legislator does or handles? And what was the biggest surprise that you had when you first took office? And Representative Anderst, we'll start with you.
I don't know if I've ever been necessarily surprised about, or even had constituents be surprised about something that we handle. What has surprised me is how many people don't know the difference between Congress and the state legislatures.
Amen.
You get constant contacts that are clearly congressionally led, and people just don't understand the difference. And so trying to make sure they understand who's responsible for what is always a bit tricky. like I said, health and welfare, obviously a lot of your constituent contacts come through needs for health and welfare. And but it seems like everybody that not everybody, but a lot of people who contact you really doesn't recognize the difference between what we do and what the federal government does. They just think it's all broke.
Senator Buckner-Webb.
And to that end, people think that we can handle everything in any bit of government. They don't realize that there's areas of delineation. Some things are municipal, some things are state, some things are the purview of a certain agency, and they think we should be able to do it all. And why aren't you listening? And I already told you once. And why isn't there a fire engine out in my area? And how come we built this a new development and we still don't have this, and this? They don't understand that we even have to go through certain protocols to get anything done, and sometimes we're not the one that can lead it.
Building off of that, the legislative body itself is a power structure. And within that power structure, you have all kinds of complex challenges. You have inter-party warfare, particularly on the supermajority side. You have partisanship between the Dems and the Republicans. Representative Anderst, you had a very difficult position. You were the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And the House Ways and Means Committee is probably the most powerful committee, although it's not used very often. But one of the things that it's used for is to put bills that we don't want to have heard, or that leadership doesn't want to have heard, and keep them there. Talk a little bit about the power that committee chairmen have. Talk a little bit about the role of Ways and Means as a relationship to that, and let's see where we land.
All right. So Ways and Means, the function behind the Ways and Means Committee isn't just to kill bills. The purpose behind it is to create the need for legislators to work with germane committee chairmen to develop products that are, at least in the chairman's mind, worthy of introduction and hearing. The timeframes are so tight when we meet in January, and there's so much that goes into trying to build those agendas in these different committees, that it's not true that every idea is a good idea. And so our the citizen legislature that we have is predicated on the chairman structure, which again, in a perfect world, you have a chairman that understands their germane area of expertise and has obviously has the support of leadership in developing which topics, and not just topics, but which language gets presented, and in some cases which doesn't. You watch over the last few years, there's been situations where I've had bills in my drawer, and then you go to the House, and individual legislators will come to the House floor and try and pull them out, and then it's kind of funny. You'll see the legislative body kind of gather around that committee process, and even if they support the underlying bill that is being held in committee, they understand that committee process is there to try and create better legislation. It's not to kill anything. It's to make sure that whatever legislation is being presented has been fully vetted to the point where at least a chairman is willing to bring it up and hear it. That doesn't mean every bill that comes before a chairman is going to pass. That's not the case. But what it does mean is that I, as an individual legislator, not as a committee chairman, but as an individual legislator, if I have a bill that I want to introduce and move through the process, I have to get certain buy-in, and part of that buy-in is a committee chairman. Obviously, part of that buy-in is going to be a majority number of the members of that committee to get it out of committee, and then a majority number of the members of the House to get it out of the House. and then the same thing on the Senate, and then I've got to get the governor to sign off too. So there's a lot of hurdles to getting something passed, not just a committee chairman, but the way that the Ways and Means Committee works is that if a chairman doesn't want that particular issue brought up, or they don't think that this is the right version of that particular topic, then they at least the sponsor gets an opportunity to introduce it, get a bill number so that they can put it in the public domain and have at least that kind of a discussion without just turning it around and not having any public discussion about that particular topic.
And to your point, this whole entire thing is about vote count, right? I don't think that the public realizes that the entire process is, do you have the votes? That's the question that I would ask my members constantly. Do you have the votes? It starts with the chairman, very powerful positions, and it moves to the committee, and then it moves to the body. Senator Buckner-Webb, your perspective coming from this, from the minority lens, was that often minorities' effectiveness was called into question. But talk a little bit about your experience with partnership and how you navigated it within the body.
Well, I guess I would tell you right off the bat, we are a super minority in Idaho, the Democratic Party. And so that comes with a whole litany of issues to try to get enough traction to take it even to our colleagues on either side of the aisle, on either body to do further. We've got to start on our own. So it can be very crushing. Let me tell you that folks that run as minority candidates have to be ready to do their work and better be thick-skinned, because in many states, in even deciding to run, their expectations were extremely low. Well, in our own state, when there's a super minority, because it's hard to bring legislation successfully to fruition, and that's part of it. And I say, when anybody says, "Look what I did," they're wrong. There's not a legislator in that body that can bring legislation and get it done by themselves. It has to be a collaborative issue, and you have to work with people, sometimes on your side, sometimes on the other side. There's more power on one than the other, but I'm just saying it takes a whole group of people to get it done. One colleague said that he and two Republican legislators worked collaboratively very well. They brought a bill to the floor, thought they had it aced, and he was told repetitively by friends and foes that it failed because that he, as a Dem, brought that piece of legislation. Whether that's truth or whether that's an impression, it can be very hard to be a super minority, particularly in a largely Republican body, or on the other side. Doesn't matter what it is. If you're a super minority, it's very hard. So the most important thing is develop relationship, and I'm not talking some phony crap, but to develop a dialogue with people on both sides of the aisle and be clear about what you're looking for, and to be honest and be transparent. That's what has to happen to make things work right. And then, by the way, you've got to have a good piece of legislation, and you have to be able to articulate it, and you have to be able to gain support for it. So the most important thing, I think, is to be open, to be transparent, and to work hard and be sure what you're doing. A formidable entity outside the body seems to have a great bit of impact over one side or the other. Okay, that's what I'll say like that. And so punitive, partisan politics are at play from time to time. And there's evidence that some decisions are made for visual effect, to make me look good so I can pound my chest. I got that done on both sides. So we need to hold ourselves accountable for what we're doing and remember why we are there and who we serve. And the greater good is what we have to work toward. It's a blame game that's way past its time. It happens from time to time. I'm not saying that we're in it now, but it has happened in the past over my 10 years. A blame game. We are elected to do the will of the people, transparently and prudently. And the gamesmanship has been rather predictable, and it's not very entertaining. I think we are way past that. I have seen we go up and down on various issues, but the folks that are there to serve. And so from being a super minority, I try to hit every minority I can find. I think I've mentioned that while I'm in that body. It's important, and I stress that. I don't care if you come in as a woman or as a man or whatever. You've got to make relationships count, and you've got to make your word count. You people don't come in automatically thinking, oh, I'm gonna trust them. They want you to show your stuff. Please tell me if I'm not right. I'm asking Anderst and I'm asking Erpelding. You got to prove your stuff. Is that true?
You have
absolutely. Credibility is worth $1 million. So
to your point, within the body, within the interpersonal relationships, the partisanship falls away. To your point,
and you're credible.
If you're a person who has good relationships, you can get a lot done in that building. Here's kind of a quick yes or no question. Can legislators abstain from voting?
In the House, you can abstain with permission from the Speaker.
I don't think I've ever seen that in the Senate.
It's really, really rare. It's usually an abstention that involves a personal conflict of interest.
Oh, yes.
But in general, the only way you can abstain from voting is to literally leave the floor, which very few legislators do.
And from time to time, they do leave at the time of the vote. That's true. That's true.
And then the other thing that I think people think is that place is just a hyper-partisan mess. But how many votes do you take a year, and how many of those votes are close to unanimous?
Oh, on the House
well, if
side, somebody
does their work, like the good representative said, if they do their work up front, they've got the votes. Is that not true?
That's absolutely true. I kind of had in my mind, there were minority ideas and majority ideas. It wasn't so much party as it was, first of all, is the idea good? And then secondly, does the legislative language match the idea? And so I didn't care if it was Republican or Democrat or whoever. If you had a good idea that needed help and I could help, then I was all for it. So for me, it was.
You're absolutely right, because it can happen on either side. Just because you're a super minority doesn't mean that all your stuff is together, nor is it on the other side. We can be whiny asses sometimes too.
And we can have some really, really bad ideas.
Vice versa.
Right.
We got to own them.
Around that market.
So I did want to talk a little bit specifically about the legislative session. You know, the legislative session often starts with goodwill and good intentions, talking about addressing big issues, transportation funding and education, property taxes. And then some issue tends to come out of one of the committees that seems to suck all the oxygen out of the session. This year, it was the fight over transgender rights that kind of came out of nowhere.
Now, how did you describe that, Scott?
That it sucked all the oxygen out of the session.
Well, it's life and death for some folks. I'm just trying to say that we got to be real careful how we frame these things. Keep going.
So then there's a mad dash at the end of the session to try to address some of those big issues that you talked about at the beginning of the session. How does that happen and why? Is there a way to fix it, or is it a good thing because it shows that legislators are bringing issues that are most important to their constituents? And we'll start with you, Senator Buckner-Webb.
Well, I just think that sometimes folks are not aware that their constituents are tremendously impacted by some legislation that they feel they could put off till later. It's one of those things that you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And I think that they think that we often think we're handling the issues that are going to impact the most people. And that may be the case. I mean, if you can't get Medicare, if you can't get people in and out of prison, if you can't do some of those, seem bigger because they're looking at population size. But some populations are greatly impacted that we do set off to the last minute. If we look at our aging population and access to medical care, that's a big one. But who has the greater lobby and the more people to come and bring their case to us? Sometimes that's the problem. It's the loudest voice usually gets the most attention. That happens. Committed, thoughtful, engaged, tenacious individuals are desperately needed. And we're all trying to incline our ear to everything that's going on, but it's still difficult.
Representative Anderst?
Yeah, so you're right. We usually start off with obviously a governor's state of a state that kind of lays out some ideas and framework. and you're right that at some point during the legislative session, typically there are some off issues that end up kind of, you said suck the wind out of.
Yeah.
I would just say they get a lot of attention. Some of that's media driven. Some of that is just purely because some topics are easier to understand and advocate for or against than others. But that doesn't mean that we don't still get some of those big things done. It does mean that some of those big things are incredibly complicated and difficult. You talk about transportation, education. I would argue we have done more in the last 6 to 8 years than the at least the period before that I was engaged and paying attention on. But I don't think that the work stop or that the progress stops just because something gets more attention, whether it's in the media or in a hearing room or whatever. The work's still being done in those other committees. From an outsider's perspective, from a results perspective, it may look like nothing happened, but most legislation is a multi-year process, and you're building constituencies, you're educating other members of the body, and it takes time to get those things done. And I think the education reforms, the teacher pay ladder, and is a great example of, that was a what was it, 6-year plan in total, where we did all of those phases over the course of those years. And because they weren't a big fight, they didn't get a lot of fanfare from the media or anybody else, but that doesn't make them any less impactful. I think a lot of it is just kind of your perspective. And I know when I finish up a legislative session, I can see big topics that were addressed, and some successfully, some not successfully, but I think they still get a lot of attention.
Some of those undiscussables get put off till the end. What is considered undiscussable by some folks, yes.
You both served multiple terms, and you're outgoing, your experience down there. What were a few of your biggest successes, and what was one of your biggest challenges?
Who do you want to go?
You can go, Representative.
Biggest challenge, Matt will appreciate this. I think our first year, we were dropped in as freshmen during the debate over the state health exchange, and that debate, that wasn't necessarily a partisan debate at the state level, but it tore the Republican Party apart during that time period. And so watching the inter-party fighting from that point forward was a challenge. I feel like as a party, we didn't do ourselves any service by labeling each other and picking sides and not recognizing I say the complexity of the issue. It was a complex issue, but it was really a simple question. Anyway, so that was a big challenge, and I think we still feel the remnants of that today, and I think it pops up in different debates over different things, whether it's liability reform or in the most recent legislative session, but those things still pop up, and that inter party stuff was one of my biggest challenges. As far as successes, to Senator Buckner-Webb's point earlier, no legislator really has individual success. I do feel like I pride myself on being somebody that could work collaboratively with others and actually bring a majority vote to important topics. We led as a kind of a treasure in Canyon County, but primarily Canyon County, on the Garby funding for the interstate, which that took quite a bit of of work behind the scenes to try and get legislators from Eastern Idaho and Northern Idaho to even care about it, as you can imagine. And some other, urban renewal was obviously something that came up almost every year. And my goal behind urban renewal was always to just add some transparency and accountability to it. And so as legislators that sit on individual committees, you tend to not specialize, but you gain expertise in certain areas. And that was tax policy and some transportation were the things that I focused on. And I can drive down the interstate hopefully one day between Nampa and Caldwell with some expanded lanes and feel good about it. We still need to do 16. I don't know if anybody's watching, but we still need to be able to, we need to get that done. So anyway.
Senator.
Some of the things that were great for me, we made some strides with education, and I'm so glad of that because, everybody keeps talking about how rapidly we're growing. Yes, we are. And we need to educate our kids and we need to pay our teachers, and those kinds of things are absolutely critical because we're moving at the speed of light. I mean, kids are growing and learning and developing, and the pedagogy is so unbelievably vast. We really need to educate our kids. That's going to be the key to us accomplishing all the things that we want to, and hopefully that will also help stave off criminal justice reform, which was another one that was of great concern to me, by seeing the number of people that are incarcerated, high number population standpoint of particularly people of color, longer sentences, staying longer, no way for people to get out, no matter what color they are, that they spent long times with a whole lot of money incarcerated when they could be being, I hope, productive members of our communities.
So this question is for both of you. What's one piece of advice you'd offer to young people in the state looking to make an impact? And what would you say to anyone considering getting involved in any level of public service? And Senator Buckner-Webb, we'll start with you.
I just say to bring your power, your passion, your purpose, and get busy. Jump in. And I mean, I can't tell you how many young people come to me and say, I want to know more about the legislature. I want to know more about government. How can I do it? Where can I do it? Let's make way for them. Let's encourage them, not discourage them, not give them the woe is me's that I might have sometimes at the end of the session, but rather just say, if I don't have an opportunity for you, let me go see if I can find an opportunity for you. And the teachers in the high schools are going out of their way to help introduce students to people that are in the legislature or in government at any capacity. But if it's not government, find something that you care about and engage and become knowledgeable about it, and then share your knowledge and keep writing those letters to people saying, I'm here, I'm ready, I want to go to work, what can I do for you? If it's passing out flyers, I don't care what it is, but be flexible and resilient and get out there and do it and ask for what you want.
Representative Anderst?
Yeah, I like the passion and purpose for sure. I've always told people that if you have an opportunity to get involved, take it. Don't sit back and assume somebody else is going to do it. Don't assume that you can't do it. I had no intentions of running for the legislature. I grew up in Pocatello. I hadn't been to the Capitol until I moved to Boise. But it was an incredible opportunity, and I wish it for everybody who has a passion for the state of Idaho. If it's local politics, if it's school board, whatever it is that you're passionate about, get involved and do your homework. And don't be that legislator or that city council person or that school board member that walks in on the first day and thinks they know everything. Have the humility to know that these issues are complicated and that they've been debated and talked about and hammered for year upon year upon year. And chances are somebody smarter than me, smarter than you, smarter than whoever else has had difficulties on these same issues. And so just go into it with the mindset that we don't know it all. We have a lot to learn. And at the same time, given the right homework and experience, you can be part of coming up with real solutions that affect people's lives in real ways. And when you are done with this life, you can look back on it and be proud that you participated.
Awesome. There's one more question from Anthony Cantor that I'll just answer really quick before I close this out. And that is, would people support a longer session or increased pay? And one thing that the legislature has done to take the kind of cronyism feeling of paying legislators out of the legislator's hand is it's created a citizens advisory committee that actually advises on whether or not legislators get a raise. And so that's actually out of the legislator's hands. And then the other thing is the session doesn't have to end at the end of March. And in fact, you know, the three of us were there when it went almost to May. It's just that the legislators really get tired of one another. So you could have a longer session and there could be some restructuring that would occur that would make it so that there's more collaboration. But in the end, the system we have has worked for a long time. And unless you two have anything to add there.
And it has some historical precedence. I mean, people were farmers. They needed to be out in the fields and they could be in session when they weren't out in the field. So, you know,
yeah,
things change.
And we still have a lot of farmers.
We do. We do. Well, Representative Anderst and Senator Buckner-Webb and Scott, thank you all for participating in today's session. Obviously, I am passionate about the state legislature. I know you all are too. I really want to thank AT&T, Micron, and our media partner, the Idaho Statesman, for being willing to invest in civic engagement and conversations like this. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Boise young professionals for really driving this idea, for engaging in this idea, and for bringing it to the chamber for a partnership. So thank you all for watching today. Scott and I will be back next week with the county commission. With a county commission conversation. And so we hope you'll join us there. And again, thanks to you three, and we'll see you all very soon.
Thank you, Scott and Matt.
Thank you.